compression. So for compression today, what we're really going to look at is we're going to look at making these drums in particular evened out so that we're not having so much dynamic range where the kick drum might not be even across the whole entire track. And let me show you what we're looking at over here. So if we zoom in to this particular kick drum, I'm just going to open this up a little bit more, we're noticing that the kick drum has this sort of signature right over here. Those are really the kick drums, and we have some other things happening in between, right? So if we take a listen to this kick drum soloed, okay, it's like a double kick drum, up, 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 okay? One of the kicks is right on time, or not on time, but sort of a little bit lower than the second kick. So it looks like the first kick throughout most of this is a little bit on the softer side, and the second kick throughout most of this is a little bit harder. And that's pretty typical, you know. I mean, especially when you're doing a kick drum pretty quickly, you're trying to conserve energy for the last one. So what we're looking for here is to sort of even that out a little bit. So we're going to add in a plugin, and we're going to use the Dyne 3 compressor limiter, which comes standard in Pro Tools, but this can be done with any compressor within Pro Tools or within any sort of plugin system. So what we're looking for here is, in compression, we have a few different parameters. Okay, so the first thing we're looking at is the ratio. The ratio right over here is how much input to output we're going to get. So what this shows you right here is that if we had this on 3:2, for every 3 dB above a certain threshold, only 1 dB is going to come out. Okay, so this line right here is technically the threshold. Okay, at which if the volume goes above this threshold, then only 1 dB will come out. So if we have 6 dB above the threshold, then 2 dB will come out. If we have 9 dB above threshold, then 3 dB will come out, because that's the way that 3:1 works. Okay, the threshold is actually right over here or right over here. I like to use these ones because this meter right here shows you the input, and then we can really set what the threshold is going to be. So the threshold is at what point above is the compressor going to start working. Okay, so if we set the threshold to right over here, anything above this line, this imaginary line, the compressor will start to enact and pull the volume down. If we have it a little bit higher, then only the peaks that go above this threshold will start to have compression enacted on it. Okay, so how do we know what threshold we want to actually use? Well, I usually start at the top, and if we can take a look at the track right over here, we're going to see that there's going to be some really high kick drums and then some low kick drums, right? So typically we want that threshold to be on the lower end right over here, so that we take these peaks and bring them down. That's ultimately what we're trying to do with compression. We want to take these peaks, bring them down here so that they all sound even. We don't want to bring these peaks up here because then we get some clipping, but we're going to take these high peaks and bring them lower, and that's going to sound a little bit more even. So if we hit this play, okay, right now our threshold's a little too hot. So bring this down. Okay, now we're only affecting those top peaks. So those top peaks are actually right happening over here. So we get that bup, and then the second one is down there. So bup, 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 bup. Okay, let me zoom out a little bit so you can also see. Okay, so there's those top peaks. There's the one that we want to match these two. So I'll even bring it down like this. Okay, next adjustments we have is the attack. The attack is how quickly this compressor is going to enact. So once it's above threshold, how long is it going to take to get below or to that ratio? So a quicker attack, say of 1 millisecond, will really make that compressor work quickly. A longer threshold is going to make that compressor a little bit slower so that the attack gets through, but then it'll start compressing. So if we do something at, say, 1 millisecond because we want it to be really quick, we now see that there's gain reduction happening, especially if I put this lower. It's a little quick for you to see, but there's a little line here. This is the gain reduction. This is how much it's actually reducing, okay? The release is how long after it goes back below threshold is it going to stop compressing. So you got to think about it this way. It will still compress even though it's below threshold. Just because you turn it on doesn't mean it's going to stop. So I like to have that release a little bit quicker if I'm doing drums. Okay, so what this is doing now is it's pulling those top peaks down a little bit more. All right, just to show you visually what's happening, I'm going to pull up a different set of compression. So I'm going to go to our audio suite, and it's basically the same thing, only this is a destructive record. Okay, so if I had that threshold right above here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more too. Okay, if I had that threshold right around there, okay, I had a 3-to-1 ratio. I'm going to have a quick attack, quick release. Now watch what happens to the picture here. Well, maybe make it a little more aggressive. Okay, see how those top peaks actually came down closer to these ones? That's because we had the threshold set and the ratio set so that we're pulling these peaks down. So without it and then with it, those peaks are coming down a little bit more. If we wanted to get a little more aggressive, we can pull those down with the threshold and then they get a little bit more even, or we can keep that threshold a little higher and add some ratio and it pulls them down even more. Okay. Anything above 10-to-1 turns into a limiter. A limiter basically says you're not going above this threshold whatsoever, and that's what's happening. Okay, is it stopping right there? Now, what you should actually be doing, it depends on the instrument. I usually like to work between 3 to 5-to-1, or a little bit less depending on what it is, and I work with the threshold a little bit more, just because it's a little bit easier. On the track itself, you're not going to get any of that soft clipping that way. So you still have a little bit of dynamic range, but you're still evening things out. Okay, so that's what compression does. Compression is going to even things out. So now that we have that compressor in the kick, so I have this compressor working right now. Okay, so even though this compressor is in, we're not seeing it change on the track because this is a live plugin. What I was doing before with the audio suite in Pro Tools is a destructive plugin, so it'll actually change the audio form. We don't really want to do that. We just want to add in plugins that are live so that we can continue to change things and see that. So now that kick drum is a little bit more even. Okay, my volume isn't so crazy now, so when I add it back
when I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna
and remix it so it actually supports the overheads again. Okay, so every time you add in a compressor, you need to go back in and do a remix so that you're basically readjusting and making sure your gain staging is good. Now, if I do this across all of the tracks, then I'm going to have a much more even mix across the way, and I can actually push this a little bit more and not have any clipping in the master fader. Again, we don't want any clipping in the master fader. We also don't want to touch the master fader from 0, right? That's basically where that lives and stays, but it's there so that we can monitor this, okay? So once I add all the compression in for the kick, the snare, the overheads, and then everything else, we're going to go in and add a little bit more reverb. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the snare drum really quick. I'm going to add in some compression. I want to even things out a little bit. Bring my attack down, release down, a little more release. And that snare is pretty actually even. Okay, what we can also do is add a little bit of makeup gain, which would bring it a little bit louder.
be the man who's even next to you. And I will walk 500 miles, and I will walk 500.
And things get a little bit more even. Okay, so if we wanted to add a little bit of delay or a little bit of reverb now, if we go to plugins and we go to delay, we use this mod 3 delay. Okay, so in delays we have 3 different options basically. Okay, you have a short, a medium, and a long delay. So for a short delay, we're actually looking at 0 to 15 milliseconds, okay? That short delay is going to give you that classic comb filtering effect. So if I take my delay time and bring it all the way to 0 and I start, I'll add 1 millisecond. And I'm going to change my wet dry mix. So now we really hear that change. So that's 0 milliseconds, 1 millisecond. We're starting to get that comb filtering effect. 2 milliseconds. Changes it up a little bit. And you can hear that snare drum is going through all of that filtering. Okay, until we get to a medium delay, which is going to be around 15 milliseconds. Then we're going to get that classic chorus effect. Okay, it's almost sounding like a doubling, almost sounding like a flam. Okay, once we hit 35 milliseconds, then we're going to get that classic echo. Okay, that's definitely 2-second events that are happening now. There we go. Okay, and anything above 35 milliseconds is considered a long delay. It's almost like we're in the Grand Canyon at this point. Now, if you do it right, you can actually find the tempo of the song, and you can time out your delay so that you can actually get like a doubling if you want. It's kind of cool. We want to do this if we get it going there. Slow, but basically I'm just trying to get it. There you go. Now we've completely changed the beat a little bit by just adding a little bit of a delay. We can actually put that on the kick drum and get a little bit of a double kick too, which is kind of fun. Okay, so that's delay. Now when we add enough different delays, we get reverb. Okay, so if I was to add, say, a bunch of short delays, a bunch of medium delays, and a couple of long delays, we would actually get reverb. Reverb is just another delay. So I'm just going to add in a classic reverb on here, and we'll use this on the snare again. Okay, so we have our wet dry mix. So dry is just the original signal, and then we can add in some wet. Now with our reverb, we usually like to be between like 20 to 30, or maybe even 15 to 35, somewhere around there is going to give a pretty significant delay, or significant reverb. Okay, with your reverb you have 3 different parts, right? You have your pre-delay or your first reflections, then you have your reverb main, and then you have your tail. So for your pre-delay, that's going to basically give you the room size, okay? Those are your first reflections. Okay, the bigger like that, the bigger the pre-delay, the bigger the room, basically. So for a snare drum, we want it to be a little bit on the smaller side. I would say like 2 milliseconds, probably the most. Now for decay, we sort of live around 1 second. 1 second is going to be just enough for a decay for a reverb, to give it just enough room. And there we go. So if we keep this around 15 to 20%, we can add some life to that snare. If we add anything more than that, it just starts to sound messy, right? So 15, 20% for this particular snare, and we sound really good. Now, if we want to actually change the type of room we're in, we can go from a hall to a church to a plate. Plates usually sound pretty good, especially for a snare. And there we go, okay? So we want to also do that for, say, the main vocal. We want to give that main vocal a little bit of life too. So let's add the reverb into the main vocal. You can actually hear how much. Let's get a good part.
Wakes up next to you when I go out. Yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who walks along with you.
Okay, so that's a little too
if
much.
I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you.
Let's put it
And
in
if
the
I
church.
hey, I know I'm gonna be the man who's even next to you. Well, I will walk 500 miles and I will walk 500 more just to be the man who walks 1,000 miles to fall down at your door.
And that's going to give him just a little bit more presence and a little bit more
When I'm
room.
working some next to you, when I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who walks along with you. If I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who's next to you.
Okay.
And if I hey, I know I'm gonna be the man who's even next to you. Well, I will walk 500 miles and I will walk 500 more just to be
On his voice to make that a little bit easier, but that's the idea. Is
when I go out.
voice a little
Yeah, I
bit
know
more
I'm
life
gonna be the man who walks
versus
along
not
with
having
you.
it.
If I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who's next to you.
Okay, so that's just going to sweeten up the vocal a little bit more.